Now, energy security, just to give you a background, means different things to different peoples. Suffice it to say right now, uninterrupted supply of energy and moving to a more sustainable energy mix are perhaps the two big objectives of India's energy policy ambitions. And we have a large section of our society which is not prosperous the way we would like to see them. Correct. And energy is something which is very, very vital to, the basic quality of human life. Cooking fuel, electricity, keeping yourself warm in the winters. India's financial well-being, India's growth agenda, and what we do for the poor to give them a decent standard of living, all of it, comes under a threat when these imported energy prices go up. From a situation where India was needing to import almost 25 to 30% of its coal requirement for thermal sector when this government came into office, despite the fact that electricity demand has grown almost at a CAGR of 4%. Today, last year, the coal imports were barely 10 to 15%. And the mines which were awarded as a result of this coal reform process, there's a minimum gestation period for them to come into production. So I have a fervent hope that by the end of this fiscal year, in March 2024 and thereafter, India may not need to import thermal coal for its power sector. So I have a feeling that coal has really contributed well to the economic well-being. The developed world, the energy demand has now stabilized. In fact, the demand has been decelerating. It is itself a challenge for India even to maintain the present energy mix of fossil and clean. What to talk of bringing down the fossil. So we are virtually on a treadmill. But happy to say that the country has adopted a very robust renewable energy agenda. You must recognize that India's thermal power capacity is also going to grow. But let's not forget, India has a very robust CNG agenda where I presently work. So my target and my task cut out for me in this Natural Gas Regulatory Board is to increase the share of gas in India's energy mix.
Hello and welcome to MoveConversations. This is your host, Venkat. It is our honor and privilege to have with us Dr. Anil Kumar Jain, Chairman of the Petroleum and Natural Gas Regulatory Board, PNGRB, and former Secretary, Ministry of Coal, Government of India. He joined the Indian Administrative Service, IAS, in 1986 and is from the Madhya Pradesh cadre. He was awarded the doctorate degree by Terry University in New Delhi in 2020 for his research on natural gas. He was the head of energy division at Niti Aayog from 2012 to 2017, and NITI stands for National Institution for Transforming India. He led the team that drafted the national policy for India for the period 2017 to 2040, and also developed the Energy Transition Modeling Tool, IESS 2047. His recent book, Natural Gas in India, Challenges and Opportunities, was published last year, 2022. And the earlier book, Natural Gas in India, Liberalization and Policy, was published some years ago. He is a distinguished alumnus of the Indian Institute of Foreign Trade, New Delhi, IIFT. And for full disclosure, I must add that my co-producer Mrigank and I were Anil Jain's classmate at IIFT. Anil Bhai, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you, Venkat.
It's our pleasure. So we will have, for ease of discussion and understanding, split it into different parts. And let's begin with one of the major topics of concern, which is India's energy security. For our viewers and audiences to understand, what is meant by creating energy security for India?
Yeah, Venkat, thank you. Thank you for this opportunity. And a very apt question to start the conversation, especially since the subject for today's discussion is balancing India's energy security with energy transition. So these are two big pieces today in our conversation. Now, energy security, just to give you a background, means different things to different peoples. Let's say in the United States, which is used to seeing hurricanes, interesting names, Katrina and stuff like that. When that strikes, it leaves large swaths of territory seeing uprooted electric poles and the electricity infrastructure. And people do not get power for several days until it is restored. So for the people of the United States, energy security basically means uninterrupted supply of power, even when cyclones and natural disasters happen. For a country like India, where we import, let's say, almost 85% of our petroleum requirements, thank God, the recent past has been peaceful. But we have seen times when the Straits of Hormuz was affected by geopolitical events.
Correct.
And the supply of crude could not come, or it was impaired, or there was a threat that it may not come for a long stretch of time. Then energy security for us meant that we would not have energy because we are heavily import dependent. And in present day times, since India's energy supply is almost 3/4 dependent on fossil fuels, and there are global imperatives which even India subscribes to on climate change and fossil related emissions. So we will have to, now I'm connecting the two big pieces of your topic today. So we have to transition to a more sustainable energy mix. And until we have a sustainable energy mix, we will not feel ourselves energy secure. So it's energy security for a country like India, where the energy demand is still growing and is going to keep growing for some time. Unlike the OECD, where energy demand has now stabilized and it's virtually, it's decelerating, has a very wide connotation. So suffice it to say right now, uninterrupted supply of energy and moving to a more sustainable energy mix are perhaps the two big objectives of India's energy policy ambitions.
Right. So that's a gives us a good framework and context to begin the discussion. So we know, and you also alluded to it, that India imports crude oil, natural gas, and even coal. And that means we are at the mercy of global markets. Please explain how significant that is and what are the consequent risks and how serious they are. You mentioned, of course, the Strait of Hormuz and a couple of other factors. Are there something else that you would like to highlight?
Yeah, I alluded to supply risks. Now let me move on to another very, very severe threat, which the heavy import dependence in energy translates for India. And those are highly speculative and volatile prices.
Right.
Now, we are all aware that in the last about 2 decades, crude has had 2 very significant spikes.
Correct.
In the first decade of this century, we know crude was touching $140, $150 a barrel.
Right.
And very recently, after the Russia-Ukraine event, it again went up to 110, 120.
Right.
Now, you know that India is still a developing country, and we have a large section of our society which is not prosperous the way we would like to see them. Correct. And energy is something which is very, very vital to the basic quality of human life. Cooking fuel, electricity, keeping yourself warm in the winters. India is a very strange country. The northern half of India faces severe winters and even snowfall in the upper reaches, and the southern India, basically needs cooling for most of the time of the year. So heating, cooling, cooking, electricity, and of course, the economy as a whole, we must grow at 8 to 9% for several decades for India to move into the club of the OECD world.
Hmm.
So this sensitive, energy markets for India, where traditionally we have been trying to help the poor by supplying them energy at affordable prices. So
Right.
often there is a cross subsidy, often there is a support from the state to power to the poor people, to the agricultural sector. Now, when energy prices shoot up like this, especially let's say after the Russia-Ukraine war broke out, coal prices for which India has been historically importing a little bit of its thermal energy requirements for power and
Right.
imports substantially coking coal, because we don't have coking coal in our natural resources from Australia for a growing steel industry. So these high prices tend to impact the fiscal exchequer, the provisioning of money for development purposes, for all kinds of other social welfare agendas, which are so important all across the world, not only to the developing world. So India's financial well-being, India's growth agenda, and what we do for the poor to give them a decent standard of living, all of it, comes under a threat when these imported energy prices go up. So I'll stop there.
Yeah. In fact, you mentioned about both coal and oil being volatile in the last last few years, and in recent times, coal. During the COVID time, it was like I was looking up some numbers, and it was like $50 to $55 a ton in 2020. 1 year later, it nearly doubles, then goes up by September 22, it goes to 450, then now is around 125. That kind of a volatility is really can cause havoc for a country. But I wanted to move further from that, and from an impact perspective, and what measures we have taken. Did Indian domestic coal production provide some cushion to Indian electricity production?
Oh yes, in a very big way, Venkat. India has one of the largest coal reserves in the world, and 75% of our total power supply comes from coal. Right. So if you connect these two things, there's the demand and the supply sides. Actually, India should not be having any coal issues. India should not need to import coal, and we should not have any energy insecurity of any kind to the power sector. But mining is a very difficult and a complex sector. Not only do you need to very delicately handle the environmental aspects, both the way coal is mined and the way the coal is consumed or coal is burnt, but also the policy framework governing the grant of licenses and leases to mine coal. So traditionally, until the present government, which has of course now been in office for more than 9 years, until they came to office in 2014, coal was treated, as a very sensitive natural resource, and the governments of the day, they used to allocate the licenses to mine them only under very, very strict captive considerations. So if you are a power plant, then you will get a coal mine. If you're a steel plant, you will get a coal mine. Now, that leads to all kinds of, entanglements. What is your power? What is your coal requirement today? Are we sure that you're going to grow to double the number or whatever growth agenda so that the coal mine capacity can be sized with that? Coal mines are naturally endowed. It's not possible really to match the resources with the demand. So the public policy requirement was that, you award coal mines at very small rent mechanisms so that the impact on power prices is not much. So government looked upon coal as a means of, extending a welfare agenda rather than a commercial, as a commodity. Now, other than the bureaucratic red tape, in handling this entire complex, sensitive issue, and you are perhaps aware, you may have been watching the media for the last 10 years, that the Supreme Court came down very heavily on, coal miners and people who had got the licenses, because many of them traded those licenses, which were given almost for free, and they went into the hands of people who profited from the premium which coal commanded. So to cut the chase, the present government, when it came into office, it said that we must just open up the sector. We will handle the pricing part of it separately, but let us unshackle the coal. So, from a situation where India was needing to import almost 25 to 30% of its coal requirement for thermal sector when this government came into office, despite the fact that electricity demand has grown almost at a CAGR of 4%, today, last year, the coal imports were barely 10 to 15%. And the mines which were awarded as a result of this coal reform process, there's a minimum gestation period for them to come into production. So I have a fervent hope that by the end of this fiscal year, in March 2024 and thereafter, India may not need to import thermal coal for its power sector. Well, there is a small segment of our power sector which was set up almost a decade and a half back based on imported coal. Coal varies from geography to geography, and the boilers have to be designed specifically for the variety of coal. So there is a small capacity which will still import coal. So government has to, by and large, managed the coal scenario, and this is a success, a policy success for the country as well.
Right. Talking of that linkage between coal shortages and the impact on power sector, there were reports that the coal shortages led to power cuts in late 2021, but then there were outages in both in 21 and in 22. You were head of the coal ministry in that period. So how did your ministry and Coal India Limited plan and prepare after the 21 experience? Was the 22 experience much different?
Digging a bit deeper into this issue, which I just elaborated from the policy and other perspective. Now, specifically to, the monsoon period of, let's say, and the aftermath, the August, September, October, these are the three critical months for coal supply in the country. Now, what happened? Let me first talk of the global reasons, and then let's come a little closer home. As you're aware that in the year March, April, in the months of March, April 2020, COVID, struck the world in a very big way. And following that, in the next year, you had the Russia-Ukraine war, which happened. And so these two events, they impacted the global economy in a very big way. And coming closer home on the topic of our discussion, it impacted the energy prices and energy flows across the world. Today, we're not discussing natural gas, but otherwise, the Russian flow of gas into the European mainland, it got impacted. And then all the LNG, which was flowing out of Qatar and Gulf, and including to India and from Australia, that also started heading towards Europe and impacted. Thankfully, we don't have a very large share of gas in the Indian energy system, so that did not really make a big difference. But in terms of coal, Indonesian coal, came, it was set afire, and it was flowing all over the world. And so firstly, the steep escalation, and you quoted the numbers just now, in the prices of imported coal, that impacted the almost 18,000 megawatts out of 205,000 or 210,000 of megawatt of coal-based capacity that India has. So roughly 8 to 9% of the imported coal-based power plants, they virtually came to a standstill. And instead of, let's say, 350 million units of power, which they were supplying every day, it fell to almost 100, 150.
Hmm.
Because, that power was contracted to state discoms who were getting it at a firm price. And that price had been internalized. See, imported coal-based plants, power coming from them has always been slightly higher price than the domestic coal-based plants. But that had been internalized in the power mix of a particular state discom. But when that power prices become 2x or something, and the Indian electricity supply policy scenario is what you call merit-based. So cheaper power will be the first one to be dispatched, and the more expensive as you go down, and the most expensive power will be at the bottom of the heap, and it will only be dispatched if there's a market for it. So these GENCOs, the discoms, they started searching the domestic market, and we have a vibrant domestic market, electricity market framework, where electricity is sold at a 15-minute interval basis. So the demand for domestic coal zoomed up in the year 2021, and again in 22, especially in the season when the monsoons impair the movement of coal from eastern India and central India to rest of the country. So now this is the domestic, imperatives, that the coal belt of India, as you know, is basically in 7 states. And these states are heavily forested, and they receive a whole lot of rainfall. And in the monsoon season, which actually starts in the month of July, and July, August, September, monsoon really, the mines get flooded, and the railway tracks are no longer as efficient to move. So this sudden spurt in the demand for domestic coal impacts the entire value chain. There's a demand for more rakes, and the railway rakes get slowed down because the tracks are wet and they are inundated, and there are all kinds of other physical impediments. So in 21, we saw that, and these imported coal-based plants, they are connected to the transmission system, and all of them have their own, evacuation capacities and constraints. So if a particular, let's say from Western India, Gujarat, which has about maybe 10,000 megawatt out of the 18,000 megawatt imported coal-based capacity, if they don't deliver power to the northern grid and to the southern grid, you can't suddenly put pressure on the eastern grid. So, there were technical compulsions and there were geographical compulsions. So for 22, the government was much better prepared. And 22, from the bad experience of 21, everybody, we wanted to stock up coal, and we wanted to make sure that the other sources of generation are all in place. So 22 went very well. And now learning from that, so far, let's say we have had terrible heat spells, but now there's a little bit of wet spell also happening. I think 23 onward, we have now cracked the code, and the seasonality of the power demand supply imbalance is now history probably for India. So again, I feel very proud of a part of this reform process, and this the other part of it that you mentioned, that how did India manage the electricity markets and in the post-COVID and all that period. While many countries, I read up that China also saw very high electricity prices because they are very highly import dependent. But in India, because of the social welfare agenda and the tight contracts that we have, and the power and the coal pricing regime, specifically for the DISCOM, the GENCOs who supply power to the to the domestic sector and all, we were able to maintain the electricity prices within limits. And India's economy, in a way, you have been seeing that last year and the year before that, barring the COVID impact, India's economy has by and large been buoyant. So I have a feeling that coal has really contributed well to the economic well-being, and in future years as well. I think power is going to be a major boost. Regular supply of power on demand and at stable prices is going to give a boost to India's economy in a big way.
Right. So, related question would be, because you mentioned in, in the discussion so far that we need power for rural electrification, urbanization, rail infrastructure. Poor people, are now coming out and now getting a slightly, and they definitely need a better life. And, people are moving into the lower middle class and they are progressing further. So I read that about India consumes about 1 billion tons of coal and is second in the world. How long will India be dependent on coal?
You see, Venkat, as I mentioned to you, that the developed world, the energy demand has now stabilized. And in fact, due to energy efficiency that they are ushering in fact, the demand has been decelerating.
Right.
They are making a transition from solid fuel, liquid fuel to electricity, and electricity coming from renewables. So there is a transformation which is happening in the West in terms of moving away from solid fuel, liquid fuels to this, and the populations are also stable. For a country like India, where population is still rising, and the development aspirations, as you also mentioned, are all rising, and India's per capita electricity consumption, is still about 1/3 to half of the global average.
Right.
India still has to go a long way in ramping up energy supplies.
Right.
Now, on one hand, we have the challenge that 75% of our electricity comes from coal, and we need to replace it with renewables and all kinds of hydro, maybe nuclear, hydrogen, and stuff like that. At the same time, we need to keep, supplying more and more power, even for the existing population, and then comes in the rising population. Right. So in a way, anybody from outside, any scholar, any ordinary person from the OECD world, when it looks at India's energy imperatives, has to perhaps be first educated that it is itself a challenge for India even to maintain the present energy mix of fossil and clean, what to talk of bringing down the fossil. So we are on virtually on a treadmill. But happy to say that the country has adopted a very robust renewable energy agenda. So you are aware that the country committed to 175 gigawatts of renewable power by 2022, when we were sitting only at about 60 to 70 at that time. And now for 2030, India has committed to 450 gigawatts of clean power. So we are right now at about 150, and we have to ramp it up 3 times in a short span of 7 years. So on one hand, you have this demand for electricity for development aspirations. Rural countryside, where almost 60% of India still lives in the villages, and those people also need to get air conditioning. They need to get washing machines, and they need to get cook stoves, electric cook stoves, and stuff like that. But even industry, India needs to keep sustaining its economic growth by 8 to 10%, with manufacturing and mining, and all this stuff needs electricity. So to my mind, the pace of growth of renewable, which has so far been about 10 to 12 gigawatts per year, and it needs to go up to double itself to 2025, as I said, that from 150, if we have to add up 300 gigawatts in a span of 7 years, we need to almost add 40 gigawatts per annum. And we are perhaps at 12 in the past, and maybe 20 this year. So with all these challenges, and without getting into other things, that renewable comes at a very high price, and we need foreign capital to flow in, foreign investors, etc. I don't see India's fossil mix to be really coming down drastically until the lapse of 10 to 15 years, maybe 2040. you might see India's electricity mix from 75 probably coming down halfway to 40, 45. So, but because it'll be a much bigger electricity system than what we have right now. And the share percentage-wise will be down. But
Right.
the growth in physical terms of renewable is going to be one of the success stories and a huge transformation which the world will see, with India taking the lead in that.
Right. So before moving to talking about renewables, I had one question. If it is probably better answered by Power Ministry, you let me know. But if you have some inputs, I'll be happy to hear that. How efficient is India's electricity generation, distribution, pricing, collection, and how high are the losses in generation, distribution, theft, non-payment, etc.?
Yeah, as you rightly said, that somebody from the power sector would give you probably a much better answer. But I have also been in the extended power sector. Coal is an integral part of electricity system. So, traditionally you divide the electricity system into three big parts: generation, transmission, and distribution. So if you come to the generation part, globally, the technology which the world grew was what you call the subcritical, in which about 33% to 35% was the efficiency of the boilers. And then in the last 20 years, the world started talking of what you call supercritical, where the efficiencies went up to maybe 38 to 40, and then, ultra supercritical, and then, IGCC. So these are technologies which were able to harness the energy from coal and from other fuels much better in the power plant. So I'm happy to say that the share of subcritical, which was inefficient by today's standards, has really diminished. And there is a policy move to take those power plants out of the system. And that is an ambition. And at the moment, as I mentioned, that if you're growing your electricity demand at 5% and renewable growth is not catching up, so those systems are still there. And sometimes as a standby, because as the monsoon, as I mentioned, sometimes it happens, sometimes there are seasonalities to the renewable aspect. If there's a poor rainfall, the tanks are not filled up, so hydro falls. So those are, the subcritical's contribution to the overall generation has really fallen. So that is work in progress. And maybe in the next 5 to 10 years, when the subcritical entirely goes away, India will have one of the most, amongst the most efficient generators in the world. In the transmission system, again, there are legacy transmission lines, and there also, you have much more efficient, transmission systems, which are the DC transmissions instead of the AC transmission systems. So the new ones, and as I mentioned to you, that renewable capacity is needing brand new generation and brand new transmission. So the transmission system which India is setting up, basically, as I mentioned, that the renewable system generation is growing at a very rapid pace, and I spoke about 12 to 15 right now, going up to 20 and maybe to 30. And on the other hand, you must recognize that India's thermal power capacity is also going to grow, sometimes to replace old fleet, sometimes to match up the gaps in the demand supply. And the National Electricity Plan, which the Ministry of Power recently revealed, says that India's coal-based capacity may still grow at a nominal growth of about 5 gigawatts per annum. So 5 gigawatts of new capacity of thermal and maybe 20-25 of renewable. So the transmission system for this massive growth in power generation is all going to be on the latest technologies. Coming to the last piece, which is the most difficult, is the distribution. Now it is in the distribution that there are thefts, and that is where the rubber hits the road. And the technologies of transformers, the last mile connectivities, that needs to be upgraded. But this has been a huge program for attention for the last at least 20 years. And under successive regimes of the central government of India and the state governments, we have constantly been upgrading. And for the last 10 years, there has been an agenda of putting in digital and smart meters in people's homes and connectivity.
Right.
So overall, where there used to be a time when about 30 to 35% of India's generation was lost in what you call aggregate transmission and commercial losses, AT and C losses. Transmission losses because the transmission system was so weak that electricity was lost in transmitting it.
Right.
And commercial losses because commercial losses actually are not really losses in consumption, because they do go to somebody's end use, but they don't get billed. So it is the transmission losses which really impact the supply, and the commercial losses which impact the financial health. So to my mind today, my numbers may not be very, very updated, but from 35, today we may be at 15 to 17%, so it's really been halved. And going forward in the next 4 to 5 years, I expect this to come down below 10%.
That's good. That's good to hear. So also gives us a segue to the next part of the discussion on near-term energy situation, India's near-term energy situation. Some of it you have already sort of pointed out. Couple of quick questions. Realistically, when do you think petrol and diesel cars on Indian roads will be replaced by electric cars? Let's say 50% replacement by electric vehicles.
There was a recent report by a government agency that by 2030, India should put an end to new diesel vehicles.
Okay.
Now, it would take a couple of years. By 2035, I expect that at least diesel and petrol vehicle new sales will probably come down to a trickle. But let's not forget, India has a very robust CNG agenda where I presently work. So my target and my task cut out for me in this Natural Gas Regulatory Board is to increase the share of gas in India's energy mix. And over the last 3 to 5 years, again, a big policy success for the country. We have been able to award licenses to distribute and sell natural gas in almost 94% of the population coverage. That is what has been achieved, and very soon. So this is award of licenses. Right now, it may take 3 to 5 years for that to really translate into reality on the ground. So there is a trend towards CNG vehicles and electric vehicles. You see, are two-wheelers and three-wheelers probably in the next 2 years, maybe almost completely electric, the new stock, and whatever may be the life of the existing stock. So maybe give it another 4 or 5 years. So by 2030, numbers a little here and there, 1 or 2 years, India's two-wheeler and three-wheeler stock may be completely electric. And by 2035, the new sales may fall to a trickle. But in this entire matrix, let's not forget the role of natural gas. And I am also looking at a very healthy growth of LNG trucking.
Okay.
So the LNG, which was restricted to the, to the coastal LNG receiving terminals and then being regasified and sent in a natural gas, a regasified way by pipelines to the consumers. I'm now noticing a lot of LNG going from terminals to consumption centers up country through, 18-ton, 12-ton tankers, which are catering to, and they may be LNG retail outlets along the national highways, giving a boost to LNG fueled trucks and lorries. So that also must be kept sight of.
Right. Of course, increase in electric vehicles also means that there has to be more, renewables-based electricity, and that's when it will be, more sensible. And Right now, I think it's about 25%. Last year, I think was the number for electricity from renewables. Uh, I think for 50%, will it take 2030, 2040 from electricity consumptions from renewables?
Well, Venkat, I think since I mentioned that 75% odd comes from coal,
Mhm.
maybe another 5% comes from natural gas and some diesel
Right.
generation. So right now, the number for non-fossil, which include large hydro projects, it includes your nuclear, should be around 20. So for this 20 number to grow to 40% share in the actual power generated may take a decade or so. It won't happen so early. Yeah.
Right. We were talking about the challenges in transmission, and you also talked about coal being in, restricted mining of coal being limited to certain parts of India. Similarly, we also see a trend in solar capacity. In solar capacities installed just in 6 states, and they are like, 80% of that is, in these 6 states. And I read that they account only for 38% of country's power demand. So even renewable energy, generated is also, kind of getting wasted probably. How will other states get it? What would be the transmission lines that infrastructure that we will set up? When will that be ready, right?
Yeah. You see, when you bring in a new fuel or a new technology into the system,
Right.
then the it comes at the intervention, the introduction of that fuel or the technology comes at a very high price. And then when that technology matures and the numbers increase, then the technology prices keep coming down. So if you remember in the year, maybe, the early 2000s, when Prime Minister was head of a state government, that time the solar power prices were 17 rupees a kilowatt hour, what is now 2.5 rupees or so.
Right.
So at that point of time, and this is true for all technologies, you tend to go to that place and that source, which is the cheapest. So the solar insolation, so in the cost of generation of renewable power, maybe it is wind or maybe it is solar. It is the location really which makes a difference. You see, the solar turbine can be moved at not too big a cost up country to any other location, but the cost of the efficiency of that machine will really make all the difference to the power price. So you will take wind turbines to maybe southern India, to Madurai region, or to Gujarat, where winds blow consistently and strong capacity winds. So initial growth of solar went to Rajasthan, went to Gujarat, went to Tamil Nadu, went to Andhra.
Correct.
And the cost of land as well is also a very high. It has a huge impact on the end consumer price. So, the desert lands and the infertile lands and lack of water. So Rajasthan and Kutch region and the Andhra, Telangana region, they were the first prime movers of renewable capacity. So that is the way which you can't fault. But the government did take care of developing a dedicated renewable transmission system, because, to give you a little bit of technology, if you have a 100 megawatt solar farm or a wind farm, then there are times of the day when they will generate 100 megawatts. So the transmission system must cater for the peak power capacity of generation.
Correct.
But then when you take on an annualized basis what you call capacity utilization factor, then for solar, it may come down to 18. For wind, they're very good. They could be about 30, 35, even 40. So the capacity utilization of a dedicated transmission system is the same as it is of the power plant. So in a coal-based thermal power plant, which probably works at an 80% PLF, the transmission system is also utilized and harnessed to that extent. So when you talk of, per unit impact on the price of transmission, which has to be factored into the price of electricity, in the case of renewable, it is slightly higher. So you need a dedicated policy, you need a thought out system. So I'm happy to say that all these things were thought through, and the large scale transmission of solar generation and wind generation was not a major issue for the generators. It was a smaller issue, definitely. But if India has to grow from, as I said, 150 to 450, it would be very onerous to put all those power plants in a limited tract of land and wheel that power. So rooftop solar plays a major role in democratizing generation across the country. That is something where India has not been able to make a success, though it has been, very high on the government's agenda. And I have a feeling that next few years, you are going to see a major transformation in that, because that is dependent on how attractive is the price of rooftop generation to a consumer vis-a-vis the price at which the grid gives it to you. And then due to the welfare agenda and other things and cross subsidies, the DISCOM has been, thanks to support from state government subsidies, etc., has been giving power to the domestic consumer at a drawn down price. So he doesn't find it lucrative to put his own rooftop solar. So maybe there are going to be, so that is one way, and that is going to make a difference to the strategy.
Right. So, so far in our discussion, you brought out two significant numbers, right? 175 gigawatts of renewable energy, and then and now you mentioned target to make it 450 gigawatts by 2030 and so on. And in fact, for last year, I think Central Electricity Authority, when I checked up, mentioned that the last year's target, they were short by 32%. Right. And you have highlighted some of the challenges, saying that, the rooftop solar has not picked up so well. There are, but if you are going to scale it to that level, don't we also need some modern transmission lines which have, much reduced losses and wastage, which you are referring to when we discuss the coal and all. So similarly, there has to be a big mega projects for just solar energy transmissions. Is that would that help us to, go closer to these targets, and also using those, not only installed capacity, but in terms of, making it available across the country and utilizing it?
So, Venkat, as I mentioned, that India did plan for a very efficient transmission system when it planned for a robust growth in the renewable capacities. Since you want to delve a little bit deeper into it, let me share with you, because all these were things which were conceived across the board, including during my tenure in the NITI Aayog, when I was looking at energy across the board.
Sure.
So what we did, we divided the transmission systems into two parts, in which we call it the intrastatal transmission system and interstatal. So since most of the capacity growth in that initial phase, from 2012 to 2000, maybe 18 to 20, took place in these renewable rich, resource-rich states of Western and Southern India. So it was the interstatal transmission corridors, which we call green energy corridors, which were specially funded by the government of India. And coal has been subject to a levy, a carbon levy, which was separately collected into what was called the National Clean Energy Fund at that time. So from that fund, money was given to the state governments and to national. You have a national transmission company, which is the PTC, the Power Transmission Corporation, and you have the local state-specific, or just state power transmission companies. So the state ones look after the local transmission, and the national ones, including private sector, has also come into national transmission system. So they were given money, and the state-of-the-art technologies were developed. But once the power from renewable is wheeled into the national grid, then there is no distinguishing between renewable and thermal. And it is the local transmission system which needs to be upgraded. Not merely because there will be renewable into it, but there will be more power into the system. And we want to reduce the AT&C losses, etc. So the transmission system of India is evolving into one of the most sophisticated. Our grid is I don't know why you've been hearing comparisons, is almost of the size of the European grid. So in the electricity system, when you have such a large dose of renewable, which is variable, etc., it is soon going to be able to manage all the variability, intermittency. And tomorrow, when the battery storage systems come in or the pump storage systems come in, it will be able to handle the fluctuations, seasonal demand fluctuations, intraday, diurnal, etc., in a very, very robust manner. So rest assured, India's electricity system is very much there.
Just the last couple of questions about prospects and challenges. You already spoke about making sure that millions of people are to move into the new era and need to have a better life, and our per capita consumption of electricity compared to USA, China, or Europe is all much less. And one question that, and we have challenges that we also spoke about in terms of cooking coal. In addition, you have LPG. We talked about transport sector. We also then steel and aluminium and cement production need electricity and energy, and fossil fuel are currently taking care of a good part of that. On an optimistic note, would you say that India would be among the first countries which will develop without fossil fuels at some, in the foreseeable future?
Venkat, I spoke about the supply sector challenge.
Not immediately, but like maybe post 2040, things like times like that.
So, well, let me tell you about the transitions underway, which will allow the viewers to be able to form their own impressions. You see, the modern economic theory tells us that markets, are great movers and shakers. India's energy system, until 15 years back, was heavily, subsidized, state controlled, and did not the market features. Gradually, today I might say that the system has adopted many features. You see now, renewables is the cost of generating solar or wind, as I mentioned to you, is below $3 per unit of power. On the other hand, today, a thermal coal power plant delivered power is nothing short of 5 rupees. And you cross-subsidize and state gives something, and you overcharge the people living in Marine Drive and people living in Dependency Road, charge them $10, $12, and give somebody free. But the economic cost is 5 rupees and that is 3 rupees. Of course, I'm not talking around the clock power, because at night there's no renewable, and then the price, the consumer may have to. But this has led to a lot of industry guys setting their group captives. They get together, they buy a large chunk of land, or they enter into a bulk deal with a renewable generator, and they go out of the government system. I mean, they use the transmission system, all right.
Right.
And similarly, talking of, we didn't speak about the transport sector much, but even that is part of the energy transition. After all, India consumes about 225 million tons of petroleum products, and out of which roughly 120 million tons, half of it is of transport fuels, diesel and petrol. So those guys now thinking of, two-wheeler, three-wheelers have completely gone out of, petrol and diesel, because it didn't make sense to continue with it. And similarly, in cities now, with a lot of CNG CNG is at a discount to liquid fuels. So, as an ordinary consumer, even I might think that if I can get CNG stations along the highways in the vicinity of next maybe 500 kilometers where I may need to go on travel or holiday, then I will no longer buy a liquid fuel powered vehicle. So more and more market considerations are driving decisions in the industry, in the homes of people. So once the CNG network rolls out, and once the PNG connections get into people's homes, and price is not the only consideration, even convenience. Now, the LPG consumer needs to get refills. There is always in the mind that, there may be a slight supply disruption. And then LPG is a little, unsafe because you have the regulator set up and on off and some leakages, etc. In comparison to that, if you had a piped gas supply into your kitchen, it's much more convenient. And there's a much higher assurance of, continuity of supply. So convenience, markets, competitiveness is now driving clean fuels and energy transition in India. So my impression is that barring the hard to abate sectors, you mentioned about iron and steel, cement, aluminium, barring those sectors, the silent and the sure transition taking place in industry, in transport, in cooking, is likely to be unleashed very soon. So I'm very hopeful about that.
Yeah. No, I think that's a very optimistic note to bring this discussion to an end.
Like all Hindi movies, in the end, the hero and heroine will meet and the villain will be killed. And
yeah. So it'll be to understand that there are viable pathways for India for a clean and secure energy futures, as well as that we can confidently navigate this transition. Thank you very much, Anil, for giving a detailed, better understanding in greater detail about energy security issues as well as the pathways for the energy transition. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It was a pleasure talking to you, Venkat.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us in yet another episode of Move Conversations. Hope you enjoyed this episode. Please subscribe to the Move Conversations YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get notifications of new episodes. Thank you very much. Till I see you in the next episode. Thank you very much. Have a great day.